Hello, everyone. My name is Ashley Schultz, Manager of Community Engagement here at Grants Office. Today, we're going to be discussing the U.S. grant funding landscape for utilities and energy. Our topics here today, they're going to be relevant for folks out there who are generating power, running water utilities, and managing other critical infrastructure. It's also going to be relevant for the folks in the local and regional government entities that oversee those entities and interact with them every day. If you were part of our last webinar where we mentioned that economic development takes a village to successfully deploy, this is really a lot of similar topics today. You're going to see a lot of overlap. Several entities need to come to the table and collaborate with one another to get these projects off the ground. So before we get started, just two quick housekeeping items for you. First, you can ask questions at any time during today's event. The question and answer interface is in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. Feel free to submit as many questions as you'd like, and we'll get to as many as possible towards the end of today's presentation. Also know that the session is being recorded. The recording is going to be available for download at the Grants Office website starting tomorrow. And the PowerPoint slides that we present here today are also going to be available in that same location. So again, today we're talking about the funding landscape for energy and utilities. I'm joined today by Joseph Phelan, who is our in-house expert on all things transportation, broadband, manufacturing, smart cities, and also energy and utilities. Joseph, he works with folks every day who are just like you. They're searching for Department of Energy grants. They're trying to keep track of state broadband funding. They're polishing up their proposals, et cetera, et cetera. He's got a wealth of grants expertise in this area, and I think you guys are going to learn a lot from him today. Here's a quick run through of our agenda over the next 20 to 30 minutes. We'll talk about the current landscape of utility and energy funding in the United States, what things are being prioritized, where are we seeing shifts for this funding, particularly at the federal level with the new presidential administration. Then we have separate sections for individual utility types. So Joseph will talk about funding for power generation and for water utilities. Then he'll discuss funding for critical infrastructure, which is water and power, but then also several other types of public services and amenities that the Department of Homeland Security has dictated is considered critical infrastructure. And then with that foundation, Joseph will leave you with some tips on where to find those funding opportunities out in the wild. So you can kind of take this information and find exactly where to get those specific grants by your state or region. And again, we're going to end with a Q&A session from the audience, so feel free to drop those questions in that bottom right-hand corner. With that, I'm going to pass things over to Joseph to get us started. Joseph?
Thank you so much, Ashley, and thanks everyone for joining this afternoon or late morning, depending on where you're located. So at first, we're going to talk through just kind of the understanding of what grants are, very high-level overview of what grants are given by a public entity or a charitable foundation to another entity for a specific purpose linked to public benefit. That's just a very general definition of what a grant is. And then here are some of the top sources of grant funding. You have the federal grant agencies. That's going to be the bulk of where funds come from is from the federal government. They have an annual budget that's passed each year that allows for funding to be shuffled to local organizations throughout the country, to states, to regional organizations, and that's usually $700 billion annually. There's also special funding such as the IIJA, Inflation Reduction Act, various bills that are passed by Congress throughout the year that also provides some potential for grant funding. There's also some states that offer funding through various programs as well. That's very popular, targeted for specific within specific states for those funds. And then the last are private and corporate foundations. It's going to depend on who's eligible. Sometimes government agencies are eligible. A lot of times it's just for nonprofit organizations. But if you specialize in a specific topic that the foundation cares about, then you may be eligible for a grant from them. When we're looking at utilities and energy funding, here are some recurring themes that we see. Definitely build out of infrastructure, any type of infrastructure. That's going to be a big talking point and spending point for the federal government, for the state governments to fund various infrastructure related projects. To increase the efficiency of an operating system, whether it's a water utility or energy utility. Any type of funds that could increase the efficiency of the organization is going to be fundable. Strengthen the resiliency. This is really ties in with the grid resiliency aspect of funding. Providing training, whether it's workforce development or reskilling or upskilling of employees of organizations, that's going to be available as well. And then you have just overall innovation, so the enablement of innovation, whether it's R&D or whether it's piloting technologies. Innovation's definitely a key theme for utilities as well as energy funding. With the new administration earlier this year, there's been some major priorities. So these are additional federal funding priorities that the new administration is focused on. So fossil fuel production, nuclear energy, critical minerals, the grid resiliency side of things, and then a pivot from clean energy. You might have seen in the news recently, there has been hundreds of grants from the previous administration have been terminated, and they have to do with wind and solar and those types of clean energy technologies. So there is a pivot from clean energy. So we're going to look, as Ashley mentioned, 3 different funding buckets. The first has to do with the power generation. So the Department of Energy in September, they released a request for information. And the goal of this request is to accelerate the speed of large-scale grid infrastructure projects for transmission and generation. So they're really asking state energy offices, public utility commissions, electric utilities, regional transmission organizations, and system operators, as well as large energy users, as to submit some questions that they have. Can that be heard? Let's see, there's no sound in the.
Yep, I can hear you just fine, Joseph.
Okay, great. Sorry about that, Ashley. So the questions that that are going to be asked of from these key stakeholders in the energy sector are going to be what kind of large scale generation, transmission, and grid infrastructure projects are needed within the U.S. Where should the DOE prioritize investments? How should the DOE fund these projects? A little bit about that. There's several funding streams that were associated with the Department of Energy in recent years through the IIJA, the Transition Facilitation Program, the GRIP program, which is all about grid resiliency, as well as various loans. So the DOE is asking for the key stakeholders' input of how they should utilize these dollars moving forward into 2026 and beyond. And then what types of new electric load are driving demand increases in service areas. So last December, a report from the Department of Energy estimated that the data center load growth has tripled over the past decade, and it is projected to double or triple again by 2028. So that's going to be, that's a key part of this RFI to figure out where exactly these increases are specifically throughout the country. And then are there any grid infrastructure constraints that these organizations are facing? So this RFI is really going to dictate what type of grant program is going to exist, as well as what type of application, what it's going to look like, what's going to be involved with the application, how much money is going to be available. So not quite a grant program. However, it does give us a good understanding of where the current administration is as far as their focus with grant funding into 2026 and beyond with this Speed to Power initiative. So I mentioned the grid resiliency side of things, the GRIP program. When IIJA came through in 2021, there were 2 separate grid-related programs, both from the Grid Deployment Office. The first one was the GRIP program, which I mentioned in the previous slide. That's going to be, that a grant program is going to come from that in some capacity. We already have seen that grant program has funded hundreds of awards in the last few years. However, states also have received funds from the Grid Resiliency, the Grid Deployment Office with the Grid Resiliency State and Tribal Formula Grant Program. And for this program, it's quite simple. It's going to fund technologies and activities to help improve the resiliency of the electric grid against all types of extreme weather or natural disasters. So funds have been allocated to states, territories, as well as tribal governments. there's been various sub-award deadlines for these electric grid operators, electricity generators, distribution providers, transmission owners or operators, throughout the country that their state, wherever they're located, they can apply to their state, whether it's their energy office or their office of commerce, whoever is responsible for administrating the funds. That's who the applicant applies for, and so it really will depend on where you're located. The amounts are gonna range. Each fiscal year since 2022, there has been since 2021, there's been an allocation to these states. So some states have, waited until they got all the allocation and then had one large application process. Others have made several rounds of funding, each year since 2022 with those funds. So it really will depend on the state. And then some states prioritize smaller utilities. Other states will allow larger utilities to apply, but there just may be a larger cost share. It really will depend on the state itself. And we do have several deadlines that are open right now throughout the country. Tennessee and Pennsylvania have deadlines, as well as Colorado in the next couple weeks. Washington State has one November 20th, and then Connecticut has their deadline is not until May of next year, and then New York State has a rolling deadline, which means applicants can apply at any time. Before we move on to the water side of things, the Department of Energy also in late summer, they released a couple pieces of information about these upcoming grant programs, which some of these funds have come from the IIJA. They're really focused on the critical mineral side of things, things to do with domestic energy. So these rare earth elements demonstration program, also any type of demonstration pilot technologies. Those are going to be some of the focuses of these four grant programs. We don't know when they're going to open. They said that they're going to open sometime in October or November, late quarter of 2025, but they haven't opened up yet. But here are just kind of an understanding of how much is available. These are going to be some of them are going to be R&D projects, some of them are going to be pilot projects, but there are some Department of Energy grants on the horizon. And now we're going to switch to the water utility side of things, where we're going to talk about two specific grant programs. So WaterSmart, there are several different programs under the WaterSmart umbrella, which is going to be hosted by the U.S. Department of the Interior's, the Bureau of Reclamation. And these funds are going to be available to conserve water, to increase sustainability, and to make more efficient use of water supplies. There could be some drought resiliency grants. There could be some large recycling grants. It really will depend on the actual program itself. But there are some, water energy efficiency grants, small scale ones or larger ones. Projects are going to typically range between 100,000 to 500,000, depending on the actual WaterSmart initiative that's that you're applying for. So that will depend on the actual grant program. But some of the examples of projects that we've seen funded in the past is canal lining, any type of smart meters, irrigation flow measurement, SCADA improvements, anything that kind of help conserve water to increase sustainability and make more efficient use of water supplies. For eligibility, this is actually only reserved for Western states. So this has been around for several years now. Texas, organizations in Texas and Oklahoma and then all throughout the West Coast are eligible to apply, as well as the territories that are located out west as well. But states, tribes, irrigation districts, water districts, any water or power delivery authorities that are located in one of these areas is eligible to apply for this program. This program, or all these programs that were expected to have deadlines this year for funding, they were pulled during the review of when the current administration took over. We still haven't seen when these programs are going to return. However, they've had so much success in the past that we do anticipate those funds being available into the future. We'll see exactly when they open. The next program is more applicable for organizations or for governments throughout the country, the CDBG Community Development Block Grant Program. There are two types of funding for this: entitlement funding as well as competitive funding. But basically, these grants are going to help to improve community facilities and services. That's one aspect of it, as well as any type of revitalization of neighborhoods, and then anything to kind of help to drive economic development. So the projects must at least touch at least one of these objectives, whether it's to benefit low and moderate income persons, to aid in the prevention or elimination of slums, or to meet certain community development needs. And there are two types of grants under this program. There's the entitlement program, which is going to be funds that are sent to entitlement cities, which are going to be any cities that has at least 50,000 residents. And then counties must have at least 200,000 residents. So this is a formula, allocation. These are going to be directly allocated to these cities and counties. There may be a competitive process internally because sometimes nonprofit organizations could apply for these funds. There might be some internal processes with how these cities and counties use the funds to subaward eligible recipients within their county or city. However, there's not necessarily like a public information about that. It's really an internal conversation you have with whoever who's in charge of the funds from your city or from your county. And then there's the competitive program, which is meant for any of those cities and counties who do not reach that population threshold. So, over $1 billion is dispersed to those states and territories. And then there is a competitive call for proposal. The deadlines are going to vary. The priorities are going to vary. It really depends on where you're located, when the grant program will open, and what type of funding they're focused on. But they fund some of the same projects as the entitlement program does when it comes to public works facilities and upgrades to those community service facilities. And now we're going to move on to other critical infrastructure, which infrastructure is considered critical if it's essential for governments to have a working society and economy. So water and energy are definitely two types of critical infrastructure, but some examples also include emergency services, healthcare, IT, transportation, as well as just general government facilities, and several more. The federal government associates 16 pieces of critical infrastructure for counties and cities throughout the country. So the DHS, Department of Homeland Security, a lot of these grant programs stem from them. They're going to, they could go to the Water Authority for whether it's cybersecurity upgrades, but it also could go to, for a city to improve their responses to improve their capabilities to prevent and respond to acts of terrorism with the UASI program, which is the Urban Area Security Initiative program. Those funds are going to be directly allocated to the largest cities, in the country to help with those types of security and resiliency plans. You have the state Homeland Security Grant Program. Those funds are going to go towards, from a soft target in crowded places, protection side of things. So physical security there for local organizations throughout the country. States receive these funds each year, and then they award to eligible recipients through an application process, a competitive process. There's also an enhancing cybersecurity resiliency piece to the State Homeland Security Program. And then lastly, the EMPG, the Emergency Management Performance Grant, same type of situation where they're going to award to states. So the FEMA or DHS, they're going to award to states, who then will subaward to eligible applicants, such as local emergency management agencies, anyone that has to do with all hazards, emergency preparedness. And then last, I'll touch on SLGCP, which is the state and local cybersecurity grant program, just because that's kind of separate from the DHS flagship programs. This is a program that came out during the IIJA, so 2021. We've seen it funded, each year since then. States have, recently submitted their 2025 allocation. So I know we saw yesterday that Florida announced their deadline in December. So we've seen some states announced deadlines for the 2025 funds recently, but it's really to improve the critical infrastructure for the security side of things, for the cybersecurity side of things. It could be equipment, it could be training, it could be a combination of both. But the goal is to improve the overall resiliency of these services that are provided by any type of government entity. And then, so last, before I pass it back to Ashley, I will explain some of where to look for funding opportunities. So from the federal side of things, there are 26 agencies that administer grants. So the Department of Energy, I mentioned that several times throughout. They have some sub-agencies like the Grid Deployment Office that is under the Department of Energy. There's also several other ones that are under the Department of Energy, but they're the ones who are going to be the ones who administer the bulk of the grant programs. The Environmental Protection Agency, Department of Homeland Security, Department of the Interior. Those are, four of the examples that I mentioned earlier, all stemmed from these agencies. And then from the state side of things, the energy office, it could be a commission, it could be an authority, a research development. Those are just some examples of what states are naming their energy offices. It could be a governor's office of energy. It really will depend on the state, but those are just some key terms to look for. And then emergency management. And then environment, you'll see some examples of various environment departments throughout each state. Division of local government, that might be specific to certain states, but some states do have that. Local government does not have a division of local government does not have a it might vary depending on where you're located, but there'll be some funds there under the division of local government. And then you might see some funds through the economic, community development, commerce, those types of state agencies may offer some of these grants as well. And then, so other methods of funding, because sometimes, there might not be federal or state grants that make sense for your organization. So there are some regional organizations, or like associations, like the National Rural Electric Cooperative Association. Right now, there's 20 million available for cybersecurity projects through September 2028. So they're really focused on rural co-ops with SCADA systems. There's also always loans and financing. So USDA offers various loans and opportunities for rural electric operators, and then there's also like organizations like the American Public Power Association, which offer opportunities for members. And then foundations are never a bad idea to look at, because even if you're not necessarily a government entity, or maybe you are a government entity, that you could be eligible based on what you're trying to do with these funds. So Energy Foundation, the Rockefeller Foundation, Climate Works Foundation, those are some examples of foundations that are focused on funding various clean energy initiatives. And that's just a couple of them. Depending on where you're located, there could be a foundation that will fund your project based off of what you're looking for funding wise. So foundations are never a bad idea to look into, because as long as the project is going to benefit the public at large, they're definitely interested in funding those types of projects. And with that, I will pass it back to Ashley, who has some things about GOCO.
Thanks, Joseph. Thanks, Joseph, for all that information. I'm just going to give you a few minutes to grab a glass of water before we start our Q&A session. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in that bottom right-hand corner of your screen. And while he does that, I just, as Joseph said, want to quickly just share some information about Grants Office Communities. It's a new search and collaboration platform for grant seekers that Grants Office just launched. We have been live since the 1st of September and have had a great time seeing folks log in and make projects and find grants, and basically work through the application process together. So like I said, Grants Office Communities, it's a grant search and collaboration platform. It's basically this kind of singular site where you can come up with ideas, bring in your partners, find grants, and then apply for them together all in the same space. So when you're in the platform, you can create an unlimited number of project pages. So these are places where you can kind of start building your vision. You can just jot down some ideas on what you like to do someday, or you can actually get very meticulous and, detail your work plan, invite your accounting team to see your proposed budget, invite your boss to supervise progress, and then you can kind of actively assign folks inside the platform tasks to keep your initiative moving forward. You can also set up separate spaces to work on proposal pages together. Again, these are kind of these collaborative spaces where you can turn activities, again, tasks, documents, conversations into completed grant applications together. And the best part is the collaborators that you bring in, your boss, your finance team, maybe an outside entity that's just helping you with drawings or specs for construction. They don't actually need to have a paid subscription to Grants Office Communities to see your page and to contribute to your work. So standing behind all of those collaboration spaces is this database of grant funding opportunities. So as of this morning, I was just checking, we have more than 10,000 federal, state, and foundation funders from the United States inside that database, and that number grows every day. So the humans here at Grants Office, we're constantly looking for more grants to add to the system, and we're always keeping watch of those existing program pages. Joe mentioned CDBG for Florida earlier, for example, to get those updates into our system as soon as we can. As a user, you can search through that database, you can look through all these opportunities, and then you can link them to your project spaces. So say you're browsing the database and you see a funding opportunity. This is CDBG in California, for example. You think it would be perfect for your community facilities project. You can link that grant to your project page so that all of your collaborators can see it, and then you can decide as a group whether or not you want to apply to it together. And then behind that, certainly, last but certainly not least, is the grants office team. So we're here to help you with any other steps of the grant seeking process that you may need. We have research and consultation services, actually sitting down with folks like Joseph to talk about your project and understanding all the grants that are specifically available to you, given who you are and where you're located in the world. We also have folks who can help you build out your project, write the proposal, actually put pen to paper on your behalf, or just review documents that you yourself have written. You just want an extra set of eyes on them. So feel free to engage with us. You can contact us at any point in time, at any point of the grant seeking process, we can jump in. Whether you are, again, not sure what grant opportunities that are available for you at all and just kind of want a review of the landscape specifically for your information, for your organization, or whether you're ready to start working on an application and can want an extra set of hands in the whole process. So I'm going to jump over to our Q&A session here. I want to first call out someone in the crowd who I believe is a fan of grant seeking because he had some pretty good advice here. And I want to particularly call out what they mentioned about CDBG. Community Development Block Grant was that CDBG acronym. They do have, to this person's note, they do have specific requirements on serving low to moderate income populations. So I know Joseph mentioned that that's specifically those funds are meant to target low to moderate income residents in your community. So, you know, keep that in mind when you're talking about a utilities project, for example. You could get a portion of a water main extension funded through CDBG if it happens to pass through a neighborhood that's 80% or more low to moderate income residents. So take a step back and be creative and think critically about your projects. And keep that in mind. Again, CDBG, they do specifically have those requirements. And again, thanks to the person who dropped it into the chat. So I have a couple of questions here as well for you, Joseph. Actually, this is quite timely. Are there any specific grants for water districts that are listed as a disadvantaged community? So disadvantaged, low to moderate income being different definitions, but kind of in the same vein there.
Yes, Ashley, there are several grants out there that will fund those types of projects. You see a lot with the Rural Development, USDA, some community facilities program is designed for rural areas or those areas that have populations of under 20,000 people. So that's one example. But yeah, there are definitely a focus on those types of projects in those types of areas.
Great. And then we've got another question about CDBG. Do you have to apply through the city or county, or do you go directly to the state?
So if you're in an entitlement city or county, that process would be within the city or the county. If you're over, or so if you're under the population threshold, so under 50,000 or 200,000, if you're the county, then you apply for with the state. So the state has their own application process that you submit for those funds.
Perfect. Great. Thanks very much. I have two more questions here. I'm just going to quickly answer the first question here myself. Someone was asking about Grants Office Communities and where to go to the platform. I will just say you can go to grantsoffice.com that you can see here on the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. There's a link to Grants Office Communities there. Or you can go to communities.grantsoffice.com or just Google search Grants Office Communities. We made sure we were the first people to pop up when you put in that little chain of words. So you can go right there. We have free 14-day trials. So if you're not sure, if you want to just hop in and poke around a little bit more, you can do that right through that website right there. So Joseph, the last question I have for you is, when do you anticipate the DOE creating a grant opportunity from that Speed to Power Initiative RFI?
Yeah, it's a great question. We definitely, sometime I would think early 2026, hopefully by like March of 2026. It's we like to say that grants, come out at the same time each year, but it has been a little bit more. Hasn't necessarily been the case with some of these some of these grant programs under the new administration with shift in priorities and focuses and things like that. So we hope that once the 2026 comes around and there's more of an established order of things. That there'll be that'll be when the grant comes out sometime in the early or late winter, early spring.
Perfect. Thanks very much to you, Joseph, again, for all this excellent information and for the great answers to our Q&A session. And thanks to all of you for joining us here today. We hope you found this to be a good use of your time, and we hope to see you on a future Grants Office webinar. Thanks so much.